Welcome back to my channel. There are moments in professional sports where a single decision doesn't just impact a season, it defines an entire era. And right now, the Indiana Fever are standing directly at that moment. Not in front of the cameras, not in front of the fans, but behind closed doors, inside a quiet, high-stakes boardroom where numbers matter more than emotions, and where one signature could either build a dynasty or quietly destroy it before it even begins. Because here's the uncomfortable truth that most fans don't want to hear. The conversation around Kelsey Mitchell has become completely emotional. People see her scoring numbers. They see the 20 points per game. They see the highlights, the tough shot making, the familiarity. And instantly, the reaction is loud, aggressive, and almost desperate. You have to pay her. You can't let her go. But what if that belief is completely wrong? What if holding on to that idea is exactly what traps this franchise in mediocrity? Because in today's WNBA, especially with the new financial structure, this is no longer just about keeping talent. This is about managing resources. This is about understanding value. And most importantly, this is about recognizing the difference between production and efficiency. There is a massive financial illusion spreading across the league right now. A dangerous one. It convinces fans that high scoring automatically equals high value. That replacing a 20-point scorer is nearly impossible. That losing a familiar name is equivalent to waving goodbye to your championship dreams. But elite front offices don't think like that. They don't operate based on emotion. They operate based on cold, calculated math. And the math here is brutal. The current salary cap structure forces teams to think differently. You can't afford to overpay for one-dimensional production. You can't afford to lock a huge portion of your budget into a system that doesn't fully align with your franchise centerpiece, especially when that centerpiece is someone like Caitlin Clark. Because when you build around a generational player like Clark, everything changes. Every possession matters. Every movement matters. Every teammate must fit into a system built on pace, spacing, and decision-making. And the moment you introduce a high-usage, isolation-heavy player into that system, you risk slowing everything down. You risk disrupting the natural flow that makes the offense dangerous in the first place. Now suddenly, this isn't just about paying a player. This is about committing to a direction. Because if Indiana decides to hand out that $1 for million contract, they're not just investing in a player. They're choosing a philosophy, a style, a structure that could define or limit their ceiling for years to come. And that's where the real pressure begins. Because sometimes the hardest move in sports isn't making a big signing. It's having the courage to walk away. Now that we've established the emotional illusion surrounding Kelsey Mitchell, it's time to confront something even more uncomfortable, the actual system-level impact of paying her. Because this is where most fans completely lose the plot. They think basketball is about stacking talent. More scorers, more stars, more names. But modern basketball, especially in a league evolving as fast as the WNBA, is no longer about how much talent you have. It's about how well that talent fits together. And when you're building around a generational engine like Caitlin Clark, the margin for error becomes microscopic. Clark isn't just another player. She's a system by herself. She thrives in chaos, fast breaks, quick reads, instant decisions. She stretches defenses before they even get set. Her greatest weapon isn't just scoring, it's the pressure she creates on every possession. But that kind of system only works under one condition: everyone else has to move with it. The moment you introduce friction into that system, hesitation, isolation, over-dribbling, everything slows down. The spacing collapses. The rhythm breaks. And suddenly, that high-speed offense turns into something predictable, something easier to defend. Now think about this carefully. If you commit $1 per million, nearly 20% of your cap, to a player whose style leans heavily toward isolation scoring, you're not just adding offense. You're changing the identity of the team. And that's a risk most franchises can't afford. Because once you lock that money in, your flexibility disappears. You can't adjust. You can't pivot. You're stuck building around a decision that may not even maximize your best player. And this is where the real damage begins. You start losing the pieces that actually make your system work. Players like Lexi Hull, who bring defensive intensity, hustle, and the kind of off-ball awareness that keeps everything connected. She's not flashy, but she's essential. Or Sophie Cunningham, the emotional backbone. The player who brings toughness, energy, and that edge every great team needs when things get physical. Now let's strip everything down to the one thing that never lies in professional sports: the numbers. Because once you remove emotion, narratives, and fan pressure, what you're left with is pure financial reality. And for the Indiana Fever, that reality is about to get very uncomfortable. The new WNBA salary structure has changed everything. With the cap now sitting around $7 million, teams finally have more room to build. More flexibility. More opportunity to create depth. On the surface, it looks like a massive advantage. But hidden inside that opportunity is a trap. The Supermax contract, fixed at around $1 per million, hasn't changed proportionally, which means one decision can still eat up nearly 20% of your entire cap space in an instant. And that's exactly the situation Indiana is staring at with Kelsey Mitchell. Now think about what that really means. This isn't just about paying a player. This is about allocating resources in a capped system where every dollar has consequences. Once you commit that kind of money, you're forced to make sacrifices everywhere else. You don't just lose flexibility. You lose options. Because now, instead of building a complete roster, you're constantly trying to work around one massive financial commitment. You're forced into minimum contracts. You're relying on limited depth. You're hoping everything stays healthy because if it doesn't, you don't have the pieces to recover. And this is where teams begin to fall apart. Not because they lack talent, but because they lack balance. Look at what happens next. You struggle to retain key defensive contributors like Lexi Hull, whose value doesn't always show up in the box score, but is absolutely critical over the course of a season. You risk losing emotional and physical tone setters like Sophie Cunningham, players who bring identity, toughness, and energy, the kind of traits that win games when talent alone isn't enough. And suddenly, your roster starts to thin out. Your margin for error disappears. Every game becomes harder. Every injury becomes more damaging. Every matchup exposes another weakness. This is how top-heavy teams are created. And history has shown us over and over again that top-heavy teams rarely survive deep playoff runs. They burn out. They get exposed. They collapse under pressure because they simply don't have enough reliable pieces to sustain success. Meanwhile, smarter teams take a completely different approach. They spread their resources. They invest in multiple contributors instead of one expensive name. They build depth, versatility, and resilience into their roster. And over a long season, that difference becomes impossible to ignore. So when you look at this decision, don't think of it as keeping or losing a player. Think of it as choosing between two completely different team-building philosophies. One path is emotional, familiar, and comfortable. The other is calculated, disciplined, and far more dangerous. Because sometimes, the smartest investment isn't the one that looks the biggest. It's the one that gives you the most control. Now this is the moment where smart organizations separate themselves from emotional ones, because the real mistake isn't just overpaying a player, it's how you think about replacing them. Most fans panic. They immediately jump to one conclusion: if you lose a star, you need another star. But that mindset? It's exactly how teams get trapped. Because in a salary cap league, replacing one expensive piece with another expensive piece doesn't solve your problem. It simply recreates it. And this is where the Indiana Fever have to be extremely careful. If they let Kelsey Mitchell walk, the instinctive reaction will be to chase another big-name replacement. Someone flashy. Someone proven. Someone who satisfies the noise coming from fans and media. But that's not strategy. That's pressure. And pressure leads to bad decisions. Think about it like this. If you lose a high-end luxury asset, you don't immediately rush out and buy another one at the same inflated price just to feel secure. That's emotional spending. That's how value is destroyed. At the same time, you don't go to the opposite extreme either. You don't fill your roster with low-cost, low-impact players who can't survive meaningful minutes. That's not efficiency, that's desperation. So where do smart teams operate? Right in the middle. Because the middle market is where value lives. This is the most overlooked, undervalued space in professional basketball. It's filled with players who aren't superstars, but they're highly functional, system-driven contributors. Players who understand roles, who don't need the ball constantly, and who can elevate the structure around them. And when you're building around someone like Caitlin Clark, those are exactly the pieces you need. Players who can move without the ball, defend multiple positions, shoot efficiently in catch-and-shoot situations, make quick decisions under pressure, because Clark's biggest strength is creating advantages. But those advantages only matter if the players around her can actually capitalize on them. That's the difference between a good team and a great one. Now here's the key shift in thinking. You don't replace 20 points per game with one player. You replace it with a system of production. You break that scoring across multiple players. You increase efficiency. You improve spacing. You create unpredictability. And suddenly, instead of relying on one person to carry the load, you have multiple threats working together. That's how elite offenses are built. That's how sustainable success is created. And most importantly, that's how you protect yourself against injuries, slumps, and playoff adjustments. Because when one player struggles, the system still works. So the decision in front of Indiana isn't just about losing a scorer. It's about whether they're willing to evolve. Whether they're ready to stop thinking in terms of names and start thinking in terms of fit. Now that we've established why chasing another high-priced star is a dangerous move, let's shift the focus to the next layer of this strategy, evaluating the so-called premium alternatives. Because this is where things start to get tricky. On paper, there are players available in the market who seem like perfect replacements. Proven names. High-level performers. Two-way impact. The kind of players that immediately make fans feel comfortable again. We're talking about talents like Ariel Atkins and Gabby Williams. These are not average players. Ariel Atkins is an elite perimeter defender with the ability to score efficiently and stretch the floor. She's battle-tested, reliable, and fits into almost any system in the league. Gabby Williams, on the other hand, brings versatility at an entirely different level. She can guard multiple positions, disrupt defenses, and create chaos on the defensive end. Her international experience and basketball IQ make her incredibly valuable in high-pressure situations. So naturally, the question becomes, why not just sign one of them and move on? And the answer is simple. Cost. Because even though they're not commanding a full supermax deal, they're still expensive. You're looking at roughly $700,000 to $800,000 to secure just one of these players. Now stop and think about that for a second. You've just spent half of what you would have paid Kelsey Mitchell on a single player. Yes, you've improved defensively. Yes, you've added stability. But what have you sacrificed? Depth. Because now you're still left trying to fill out the rest of your roster with limited resources. You're still dealing with financial constraints. You're still one injury away from exposing serious weaknesses. And that's the hidden problem with operating in this upper middle tier. You get quality, but you don't get enough of it. In a league that's becoming faster, more physical, and more demanding with every season, having one or two solid players isn't enough anymore. You need waves. You need rotation depth. You need multiple players who can step in and contribute without the entire system collapsing. And that's something this approach struggles to provide. Because while players like Atkins and Williams absolutely raise your ceiling in certain areas, they don't completely solve the structural issue created by losing a high-usage scorer. You're still missing pieces. You're still unbalanced. And over the course of a long season, those gaps become very real. This is why elite front offices don't stop their analysis at talent alone. They look at value. They look at fit. And most importantly, they look at how many problems one move actually solves. Because the goal isn't just to replace a player. The goal is to build a roster that can survive pressure, adapt to different matchups, and maintain performance across an entire season. So while the premium tier offers safety and familiarity, it doesn't offer the complete solution. And that brings us to the most important part of this entire strategy. The place where real value exists. The place where smart teams quietly build contenders while everyone else is chasing headlines. The middle market. And this is where everything changes. Now we've arrived at the most important layer of this entire strategy, the middle market. This is where smart front offices separate themselves from everyone else. Not by chasing headlines, but by identifying value that others overlook. Because this is where championships are quietly built. And at the center of this approach is a player who perfectly represents everything the Indiana Fever should be targeting right now, Bridget Carleton. Now she's not the flashiest name. She's not dominating highlight reels. She's not the kind of player casual fans demand on social media. But from a system perspective, she's almost perfect. Carleton brings size, intelligence, and discipline to the perimeter. She understands spacing. She understands timing. And most importantly, she understands how to contribute without dominating the ball. And that's exactly what you need next to a player like Caitlin Clark. Because Clark doesn't need another high-usage scorer next to her. She needs players who can read the floor, move into the right positions, and capitalize on the opportunities she creates. That's where Carleton thrives. She's an elite catch-and-shoot threat. When defenses collapse on Clark, and they will, Carleton becomes the release valve. The player waiting in the corner. The player ready to punish defensive mistakes with efficient, high-percentage shots. But her value doesn't stop there. Defensively, she brings stability. She competes. She communicates. She holds her position and doesn't break under pressure. These are the kinds of traits that don't always show up in stat sheets, but they win games over time. Now here's where things get really interesting. Because while her impact is significant, her cost isn't. You're looking at roughly $550,000 to $600,000 to secure her on the open market. Let that sink in. For less than half of what you would pay Kelsey Mitchell, you're getting a player who fits the system better, enhances your offensive structure, and strengthens your defense. And you're still saving around $800,000 in cap space. That's not just a good deal. That's a strategic advantage. Because now, instead of committing all your resources to one player, you've created room to build more. You've opened the door to adding another piece. And another. And suddenly, your roster starts to take shape in a completely different way. More balanced. More flexible. More dangerous. This is what elite roster construction looks like. It's not about finding the biggest name. It's about finding the right fit at the right price, and then stacking those decisions together until you've built something that no